In the distant reaches of a galaxy far beyond human comprehension, there existed two civilizations that had long been at odds. The humans, known for their relentless determination and technological prowess, were locked in an uneasy truce with the Xantherians, a species as mysterious as they were misunderstood. The Xantherians hailed from a planet cloaked in perpetual twilight, where bioluminescent flora illuminated their world in hues unknown to Earth's spectrum. At the heart of this fragile peace stood General Alden Hayes, a decorated soldier whose reputation stretched across star systems. Known for his strategic brilliance and unyielding resolve, Alden was celebrated not only among his ranks but also feared by adversaries. His presence commanded respect, yet beneath his stoic exterior lay a man burdened by years of conflict and loss. Opposite him stood Princess Lyria Valen, the youngest daughter of King Soren Valen of the Xantherian Empire. Unlike her siblings, who were renowned warriors and diplomats, Lyria was often dismissed as the weakest link in the royal family. Her diminutive stature and seemingly frail constitution made her an object of pity rather than admiration within the court. Yet, those who overlooked her did so at their peril, failing to recognize the depths of her character and abilities hidden beneath her gentle demeanor. The stage was set for an unprecedented alliance when tensions between the two species reached a boiling point. Diplomatic efforts had faltered repeatedly, leaving both sides teetering on the brink of war once more. Desperate to avoid further bloodshed, King Soren proposed an unconventional solution, a marriage between General Alden Hayes and Princess Lyria Valen. This union would serve not only as a symbol of unity but also as a means to solidify peace through shared governance. Neither party welcomed this arrangement with open arms. For Alden, it represented another form of captivity, a binding contract disguised as diplomacy. He viewed Lyria as nothing more than a pawn in a political game he never asked to play. Meanwhile, whispers throughout the Xantherian court painted Lyria as undeserving of such a prestigious match, fueling resentment among her peers. As both parties prepared for what seemed like an inevitable disaster, neither could have foreseen how profoundly their lives, and perhaps even the fate of their respective worlds, would change because of this forced alliance. The grand hall of the Xantherian palace shimmered with iridescent lights, casting an otherworldly glow over the ceremony that bound General Alden Hayes to Princess Lyria Valen. The atmosphere crackled with tension, as though the very air itself knew the gravity of the moment. Alden stood rigid, his jaw clenched so tightly it might shatter under the strain. Every muscle in his body screamed rebellion against the charade, yet here he was, dressed in ceremonial garb that felt alien, not just because of its unfamiliar design but because it symbolized everything he despised about this forced union. His eyes flickered toward Lyria, who stood beside him, small and composed, her delicate frame wrapped in flowing robes that shimmered like liquid starlight. She didn't meet his gaze, her head bowed slightly as if she bore some invisible weight only she could feel. For Alden, the entire ordeal was unbearable. He couldn't fathom how anyone thought this marriage would work. To him, Lyria wasn't just weak, she was a liability. Her quiet demeanor and soft-spoken nature grated on his nerves, making her seem even more out of place next to someone like him, hardened by decades of warfare and sacrifice. When the officiant declared them bonded under the laws of both species, Alden barely managed to mutter the required vows, each word tasting bitter as ash on his tongue. As the ceremony concluded and cheers erupted around them, he turned to leave without so much as glancing at his new bride, his boots echoing sharply against the marble floor. Lyria watched him go, her expression unreadable but her hands trembling faintly beneath the folds of her sleeves. Around her, the Xantherian court buzzed with whispered commentary, none of it kind. Some sneered openly at her, while others offered thinly veiled condolences for being saddled with the human brute. It stung, but not nearly as much as the cold indifference Alden had shown her since their first meeting. She had hoped, childishly perhaps, that he might see past appearances and recognize her worth. Instead, he treated her like a mere obligation, something to endure rather than embrace. That night, in their shared quarters, the tension between them was palpable. Alden paced the room like a caged predator, refusing to sit or acknowledge Lyria's presence. She sat quietly on the edge of the bed, her posture perfect despite the storm brewing inside her. Finally, unable to bear the silence any longer, she spoke softly, her voice carrying a note of quiet defiance. "You don't have to like me," she said, surprising even herself with the steadiness of her tone. "But I won't be ignored." Alden stopped mid-step and turned to face her, his eyes blazing with frustration. "Ignored?" "You think this is about you?" he snapped, his voice cutting through the stillness like a blade. "This isn't a partnership, it's a prison sentence. Don't expect me to pretend otherwise." Her lips parted as if to respond, but no words came. Instead, she rose to her feet, standing tall despite her slight frame. For a moment, their gazes locked, two wills colliding in a silent battle neither was willing to concede. Then, without another word, Alden stormed out, leaving Lyria alone in the vast, echoing chamber. She sank back onto the bed, her composure finally cracking as tears welled up in her luminous eyes. But even as they spilled down her cheeks, a spark of determination ignited within her. If Alden wanted to see her as weak, fine. Let him believe what he wanted, for now. Days blurred into weeks as Alden and Lyria settled into an uneasy rhythm of coexistence. Their interactions were minimal, limited to curt exchanges during formal dinners or brief encounters in the palace corridors. Alden avoided her whenever possible, immersing himself in military strategy sessions or patrols along the borderlands. Each task served as a distraction, keeping him occupied and away from the woman he saw as little more than a burden. Lyria, on the other hand, spent her days navigating the labyrinthine politics of the Zintherian court, enduring snide remarks and dismissive glances from those who considered her unworthy of her title, or her husband. Despite the frosty distance between them, subtle shifts began to emerge beneath the surface. During one particularly grueling training exercise, Alden found himself cornered by a group of elite Zintherian warriors eager to test the famed human general's mettle. Outnumbered and exhausted, he braced for the worst until a familiar voice cut through the chaos. "Enough," Lyria said firmly, stepping into view. Her presence silenced the warriors instantly, their surprise evident. Though she rarely asserted authority, her command carried undeniable weight. Without another word, she gestured for Alden to follow her, leading him away from the confrontation. Later that evening, Alden brooded in his private study, replaying the incident in his mind. He hated feeling indebted to anyone, least of all Lyria. Yet, there was no denying she had intervened when he least expected it, and done so with an authority that defied her supposed weakness. The memory gnawed at him, planting seeds of doubt about his initial assessment of her. Meanwhile, Lyria retreated to her chambers, reflecting on the encounter with mixed emotions. She hadn't acted out of affection or loyalty. Rather, it was instinctual, driven by a desire to prevent unnecessary conflict. Still, seeing Alden's guarded expression soften ever so slightly gave her pause. Perhaps there was more to this arrangement than either of them realized. Their paths crossed again during a diplomatic banquet hosted by King Soren, where representatives from neighboring systems gathered to celebrate the newly formed alliance. As protocol demanded, Alden and Lyria stood side by side, presenting a united front despite the palpable tension simmering between them. Midway through the event, a visiting dignitary, a towering Caliph ambassador with crystalline skin, approached them, his gaze lingering skeptically on Lyria. "Tell me, princess," he drawled, his voice dripping with condescension, "what precisely do you bring to this union besides your title?" The question hung in the air, sharp and cutting. Lyria hesitated, her fingers tightening around the stem of her glass. Before she could respond, Alden stepped forward, his stance protective. "She brings integrity," he said evenly, his tone leaving no room for argument. "Something you'd do well to emulate." The ambassador blinked, clearly taken aback, before retreating with a stiff nod. Lyria stared at Alden, stunned by his unexpected defense of her. For a fleeting moment, their eyes met, and something unspoken passed between them, an acknowledgment, perhaps, that they weren't as different as they'd believed. Neither lingered on the moment, retreating back into their respective roles, but the seed of understanding had been planted. It was during these small, unpredictable moments that cracks began to form in the walls they'd built around themselves. Alden noticed how Lyria navigated the treacherous waters of court politics with quiet grace, deflecting insults with a poise that belied her apparent fragility. And Lyria observed how Alden's leadership inspired loyalty among his troops, even as he struggled to reconcile his disdain for the situation thrust upon him. Slowly, imperceptibly, their mutual animosity softened into wary curiosity. They remained divided by circumstance and pride, but the foundation of their relationship shifted subtly, hinting at possibilities neither dared to articulate. One fateful evening, as the twin moons of Zinthera cast an ethereal glow over the palace gardens, Lyria wandered alone among the glowing flora. The flowers pulsed softly with light, their colors shifting in response to her presence. It was here, amidst the serene beauty of her home, that she allowed herself to let down the walls she maintained so carefully. Her thoughts drifted to Alden, his stubbornness, his strength, and the way he seemed determined to resist any connection with her. She sighed, brushing her fingers against the petals of a lumina blossom, its light dimming momentarily before brightening again. If only he could see beyond the facade she presented, she mused. Unbeknownst to Lyria, Alden had followed her into the garden, drawn by an inexplicable urge to understand the woman he had married. Hidden behind a cluster of bioluminescent trees, he watched her move gracefully through the foliage, her figure bathed in the soft glow of the moonlight. There was a vulnerability in her solitude that tugged at something deep within him, stirring emotions he had long suppressed. As he stepped closer, his foot caught on a root, causing a slight rustle. Lyria spun around, her eyes wide with surprise. "General Hayes," she greeted, her voice steady despite the unexpected intrusion. "What brings you here?" Caught off guard, Alden hesitated before replying, "I needed some air." His gaze swept over her, noting the calm serenity she exuded. "I didn't mean to intrude." Lyria smiled softly, a gesture that seemed to illuminate the space around her. "You're not intruding. The garden is open to all." The awkwardness between them was palpable, but neither moved to leave. Instead, they found themselves talking, tentatively at first, then with increasing ease. They discussed trivial matters, the peculiarities of Xantherian flora, the differences in their homeworld's night skies. Gradually, the conversation deepened, touching on topics neither had dared to breach before. Lyria spoke of her struggles within the royal court, her voice tinged with a mixture of sadness and resilience. Alden listened intently, surprised by the depth of emotion she revealed. In turn, Alden opened up about his own battles, the losses he had endured, the burdens of leadership that weighed heavily on his shoulders. Lyria's eyes softened with empathy, and for the first time, Alden felt truly heard. The barriers they had erected began to crumble, piece by piece, replaced by a burgeoning sense of mutual respect. As the night wore on, the atmosphere shifted. The tension that had always simmered between them transformed into something warmer, more intimate. They laughed together at a shared joke, their laughter mingling with the gentle hum of the garden's life. In that moment, surrounded by the pulsating lights of the flora, they forgot the roles they were supposed to play. They were simply two beings, drawn together by circumstances neither had chosen but now found themselves navigating together. When they finally returned to the palace, the air between them was charged with unspoken possibilities. Though neither voiced it, both knew that something fundamental had changed. The garden had become a sanctuary where walls fell and hearts began to open, setting the stage for revelations yet to come. The following day brought an unexpected twist to the fragile peace between Alden and Lyria. A distress signal from the outer rim of Xantherian territory shattered the calm, drawing both their attention. Reports indicated a rogue faction of Xylari raiders had breached the borders, threatening nearby settlements. Alden, ever the soldier, immediately sprang into action, organizing a defensive strategy with precise efficiency. Lyria, however, did not retreat to safety as expected. Instead, she insisted on accompanying him to the front lines. "Absolutely not," Alden barked, his voice sharp with disbelief. "This is no place for you." Lyria raised an eyebrow, her expression calm but resolute. "I am not asking for permission, General. I am stating my intention. These are my people too." Her unwavering determination caught him off guard, but Alden had no time to argue further. With a frustrated growl, he conceded, issuing strict orders for her protection. As they boarded the transport vessel, Alden couldn't shake the unease settling in his gut. He glanced at Lyria, her slender frame clad in lightweight armor that seemed woefully inadequate against the impending danger. Yet, there was a steely glint in her eyes that hinted at reserves of strength he had yet to witness. Upon reaching the battlefield, chaos reigned. The Xylari raiders were fierce, their advanced weaponry wreaking havoc on the unsuspecting settlers. Alden led his troops with tactical precision, carving through enemy lines with ruthless efficiency. Amidst the turmoil, Lyria positioned herself near the medical tents, aiding the wounded with surprising skill. Her hands moved deftly, bandaging wounds and administering treatments with a calm assurance that belied her delicate appearance. Then, the tide turned abruptly. A group of Xylari infiltrators broke through the defensive perimeter, heading straight for the command post where Alden coordinated the counterattack. Outnumbered and overwhelmed, Alden fought valiantly, but the sheer force of the attackers began to wear him down. Just as despair threatened to engulf him, a blur of motion streaked past, a figure moving with unnatural speed and agility. It was Lyria. Gone was the quiet, reserved princess. In her place stood a warrior, her movements fluid and lethal. She wielded a pair of energy blades with practiced ease, their glow illuminating the battlefield in dazzling arcs. One by one, the Xylari fell before her, their weapons useless against her swift strikes. Alden watched in stunned silence, his mind struggling to reconcile the woman he thought he knew with the formidable fighter before him. With the immediate threat neutralized, Lyria turned to Alden, her chest heaving but her expression composed. "Are you injured?" she asked, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. Alden shook his head, still processing what he had witnessed. "No, I'm fine." "But how?" Lyria interrupted him with a small smile. "There is much about me you do not know, General. Perhaps it is time we addressed that." Before Alden could respond, another wave of Xylari forces surged forward, forcing them back into the fray. Together, they fought side by side, their combined skills turning the tide of battle. Where Alden's brute strength faltered, Lyria's agility prevailed, and vice versa. Their synergy was undeniable, born of necessity but fueled by newfound respect. As the dust settled and victory became certain, Alden found himself staring at Lyria with a mixture of awe and confusion. The woman who had once seemed so fragile now radiated power and confidence, her true nature unveiled in the crucible of combat. Questions swirled in his mind, each one begging for answers. What else had she concealed beneath her serene exterior? And more importantly, why? Standing amidst the aftermath, Lyria met his gaze, her own filled with a quiet resolve. "We have much to discuss," she said simply, her voice carrying a weight that promised revelations far beyond anything Alden could have imagined. In the aftermath of the battle, Alden found himself grappling with a whirlwind of emotions. The image of Lyria wielding those energy blades with lethal precision haunted his thoughts, challenging every preconceived notion he'd held about her. Guilt gnawed at him for his earlier dismissiveness, while a burgeoning admiration began to take root. He realized that beneath her gentle exterior lay a reservoir of untapped strength and skill, qualities he had foolishly overlooked. As they returned to the palace, the journey was marked by a tense silence. Alden wrestled with the urge to confront Lyria about her hidden abilities, yet uncertainty tethered his tongue. How could he demand explanations when he himself had been so quick to judge? Inside the grand halls, the atmosphere felt heavier than usual, as if the very walls sensed the seismic shift occurring between them. Alden paced his quarters, the memory of Lyria's prowess replaying in his mind like a relentless echo. Meanwhile, Lyria retreated to her chambers, her reflection in the mirror revealing a woman caught between worlds. The battle had stripped her of pretense, exposing parts of herself she had meticulously kept hidden. She understood that Alden's perception of her had irreversibly changed, and with it, the dynamics of their forced union. Yet, instead of fear or regret, she felt a strange liberation, as if shedding layers of expectation allowed her to breathe freely for the first time. Determined to bridge the chasm widening between them, Alden sought her out later that evening. Knocking gently on her door, he entered to find her seated by the window, gazing out at the stars. "We need to talk," he began, his voice tinged with both apology and curiosity. Lyria turned to face him, her expression enigmatic. "Yes, we do," she replied, inviting him to sit opposite her. The ensuing conversation unraveled layers of secrets, as Lyria explained her training in ancient Xantherian combat techniques, reserved only for those of royal blood. She spoke of the expectations placed upon her to embody both strength and grace, a duality she had mastered in solitude. Alden listened intently, his respect for her deepening with each revelation. "Why keep this from me?" he asked, his voice softer now, laced with genuine intrigue. "Because trust must be earned, not assumed," she answered, her gaze steady. "And perhaps, General, I needed you to see me as more than just a title or a duty." The exchange marked a pivotal moment in their relationship. Walls that had stood firm began to crumble, replaced by a tentative understanding. They spoke late into the night, sharing stories of their pasts, their fears, and their hopes for a future that suddenly seemed less daunting. By the time dawn broke, a fragile but promising bond had begun to form, rooted in mutual respect and newfound admiration. Outside their private reconciliation, whispers of the battle spread through the palace and beyond. News of the princess's valor reached even the most skeptical corners of the court, silencing doubters and earning Lyria a respect she had long been denied. For Alden, witnessing this transformation in real time reinforced his growing belief that perhaps, just perhaps, their forced marriage might evolve into something neither had anticipated, something stronger and more resilient than either had dared to hope. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting elongated shadows across the palace grounds, Alden and Lyria found themselves facing a new challenge that would test the fragile bond they had begun to forge. Intelligence reports trickled in, speaking of unrest brewing among factions within the Xantherian court. Whispers of rebellion echoed through the marble corridors, fueled by those who doubted the efficacy of the human-Xantherian alliance. The dissenters saw Lyria's newfound prominence not as a testament to her capabilities but as a threat to traditional power structures. Alden, ever vigilant, noticed the subtle shifts in the court's dynamics. Servants exchanged hurried glances, and advisors lingered longer than necessary after meetings, their voices dropping to conspiratorial whispers. He recognized the signs, having faced similar insurrections during his military career, and knew that ignoring these murmurs could lead to dire consequences. Yet, addressing them directly posed its own risks, especially given the precarious balance of power. Lyria, too, felt the tremors rippling through her world. She had always been aware of the undercurrents of disdain directed at her, but now, with her abilities laid bare, the hostility took on a sharper edge. Some of her peers accused her of deceit, claiming she had manipulated circumstances to elevate her status. Others questioned Alden's role in her transformation, suggesting he had orchestrated her display of strength to undermine Xantherian autonomy. The accusations stung, not because they held truth but because they highlighted the deep-seated prejudices she had long battled. Together, Alden and Lyria devised a plan to quell the growing unrest. Drawing on Alden's strategic expertise and Lyria's intimate knowledge of court politics, they crafted a dual approach: public demonstrations of unity coupled with covert investigations into the rebellion's leaders. At a grand assembly, they stood side by side, addressing the court with a message of solidarity. Lyria's voice rang clear and commanding, dispelling doubts about her intentions while asserting her commitment to the alliance. Alden supported her words with actions, pledging to integrate human and Xantherian forces in joint operations aimed at strengthening their shared defenses. Behind the scenes, however, the work proved more arduous. Late-night meetings became routine as they sifted through intelligence reports, piecing together fragments of information to identify key conspirators. Trust between them deepened with each session, their collaboration seamless despite occasional disagreements. Alden marveled at Lyria's ability to navigate complex political landscapes, her insights often steering them away from potential pitfalls. In turn, Lyria appreciated Alden's pragmatism, his straightforward approach cutting through layers of subterfuge. Yet, as they closed in on the rebellion's core, external pressures mounted. News arrived of renewed aggression from the Xylari, their previous defeat having emboldened them rather than deterred. Scouts reported increased activity along the border, suggesting an imminent invasion. The timing couldn't have been worse, stretching their resources thin and forcing them to divide their focus. Amidst the mounting tension, personal stakes heightened. Alden grappled with feelings of inadequacy, questioning whether he was doing enough to protect Lyria and uphold the fragile peace. Memories of past failures haunted him, fueling sleepless nights spent poring over maps and strategies. Lyria, sensing his inner turmoil, offered quiet reassurances, reminding him of their shared strengths. Her unwavering support bolstered his resolve, reinforcing the idea that they were stronger together than apart. Simultaneously, Lyria confronted her own vulnerabilities. The weight of leadership pressed heavily on her shoulders, compounded by the knowledge that any misstep could unravel the progress they had made. Doubts crept in, whispering insidious thoughts about her suitability for the role thrust upon her. But each time she faltered, Alden's steadfast presence reminded her of her worth, grounding her in the reality of what they had achieved together. As preparations for the impending conflicts intensified, moments of levity became rare but cherished. They found solace in shared laughter over minor victories, a successful negotiation here, a thwarted plot there, and in stolen glances that spoke volumes without words. These fleeting respites fortified them, preparing them for the trials ahead. With the rebellion simmering dangerously close to eruption and the Xylari threat looming larger by the day, Alden and Lyria braced themselves for the challenges that awaited. United by necessity and bound by emerging affection, they stood ready to face whatever the universe threw their way. Their journey had only just begun, yet already, they had transformed from reluctant partners into allies whose combined strength promised to reshape the destiny of their intertwined worlds. The day of reckoning arrived sooner than either Alden or Lyria had anticipated. The rebellion within the Xyntherian court erupted into open defiance, with a faction of high-ranking nobles declaring their intent to dissolve the alliance and restore what they called true Xyntherian sovereignty. At the same moment, scouts confirmed that the Xylari fleet was en route to the border, its size and armament far exceeding anything they had faced before. The dual threats converged like storm clouds on the horizon, threatening to engulf them in chaos. Alden and Lyria wasted no time. They convened an emergency council, bringing together trusted advisors from both human and Xyntherian ranks. The room buzzed with tension as plans were laid out, defensive strategies for the borderlands, covert operations to neutralize key rebel leaders, and public statements aimed at rallying support for the alliance. What struck Alden most was how seamlessly Lyria commanded the attention of the room. Her voice carried authority, her decisions swift yet deliberate. Gone was any trace of the timid princess he had once dismissed. In her place stood a leader whose presence inspired loyalty and confidence. As preparations unfolded, Alden took charge of military logistics, coordinating joint forces to fortify the borders. He worked tirelessly, his mind consumed by maps, troop movements, and supply chains. Yet, even amidst the relentless pace, he found himself stealing glances at Lyria whenever she entered the war room. She moved with purpose, her luminous eyes scanning reports and offering insights that often turned the tide of discussions. Their partnership had evolved into something extraordinary, a synergy born not just of necessity but of mutual trust and respect. Meanwhile, Lyria spearheaded efforts to quell the rebellion internally. Drawing upon her intimate knowledge of court politics, she orchestrated a series of calculated moves to isolate the rebels' leadership. Through a combination of diplomacy, intelligence gathering, and carefully timed revelations of their treachery, she dismantled their network piece by piece. It wasn't easy. She faced betrayal from allies she had once trusted, endured venomous accusations, and weathered sleepless nights, but her resolve never wavered. Each victory, no matter how small, brought her closer to securing peace within the kingdom. The final confrontation came when the Xylari fleet breached Xyntherian airspace. The battle that ensued was nothing short of epic. Human and Xyntherian forces fought side by side, their combined strength proving formidable against the invaders. Alden led from the front lines, his tactical brilliance guiding the defense. Lyria, refusing to remain behind, joined him on the battlefield, her energy blade slicing through enemy ranks with precision and grace. Together, they became a living legend, their names whispered in awe by soldiers on both sides. At one critical juncture, the tide of the battle shifted dangerously. A massive Xylari dreadnought descended upon the palace itself, its weapons trained on the heart of the Xyntherian Empire. With little time to act, Alden devised a daring plan to infiltrate the vessel and disable its core systems. But the mission required someone who could navigate the ship's labyrinthine interior undetected, and there was only one person capable of such stealth. "I'll go," Lyria said firmly, meeting Alden's gaze without hesitation. "No," Alden replied instantly, his tone brooking no argument. "It's too dangerous. And staying here isn't," she countered, her voice steady despite the urgency of the moment. "You need someone who can move quickly and quietly. That's me." For a heartbeat, they locked eyes, the weight of everything unsaid passing between them. Then, with a reluctant nod, Alden relented. "Be careful," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I mean it." Lyria smiled faintly, her expression softening. "Always." With that, she disappeared into the fray, slipping aboard the dreadnought under cover of darkness. Inside, she navigated the alien corridors with practiced ease, evading patrols and disabling security systems with surgical precision. When she reached the core chamber, however, she found herself face to face with the Xylari commander, a towering figure clad in armor that shimmered like obsidian. The ensuing duel was fierce, each strike reverberating through the ship's hull. But Lyria's agility and determination gave her the edge, and with a final decisive blow, she destroyed the core, sending the dreadnought spiraling toward destruction. Back on the ground, Alden watched as the massive vessel exploded in a brilliant cascade of light. Relief washed over him, followed immediately by terror. "Lyria!" he shouted, scanning the wreckage frantically. Moments later, she emerged from the smoke, battered but alive, her blades glowing faintly in the aftermath. When the dust settled, the Xylari forces retreated, their morale shattered. The rebellion crumbled soon after, its leaders exposed and arrested. Peace, fragile though it remained, was restored. In the days that followed, celebrations erupted across both human and Xyntherian territories. The alliance, once seen as a forced arrangement, was now hailed as a triumph of unity and cooperation. For Alden and Lyria, the transformation ran deeper. No longer bound by duty alone, they found themselves drawn together by something far stronger: love. It had bloomed quietly amidst the chaos, nurtured by shared trials and unwavering support. On a quiet evening, beneath the twin moons of Xynthera, Alden knelt before Lyria, taking her hand in his. "I thought I knew what strength looked like," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "But you showed me something greater, a courage that comes from the heart. I don't deserve you, but if you'll have me, I want to spend the rest of my life proving that I'm worthy." Tears glistened in Lyria's eyes as she smiled, her grip tightening around his hand. "You already have," she whispered. "And yes, I'll have you." Their union, forged in fire and tempered by adversity, became a symbol of hope for two species striving to coexist. Under their leadership, humans and Xyntherians built bridges instead of walls, forging a future defined not by division but by unity. As they stood together on the palace balcony, watching fireworks light up the night sky, Alden wrapped an arm around Lyria's shoulders, pulling her close. "You know," he said with a grin, "for someone who was supposed to be the weakest link, you've proven to be pretty unstoppable." Lyria laughed softly, leaning into him. "And for someone who thought he couldn't be tamed, you've turned out to be quite the devoted partner." Together, they gazed out at the stars, knowing that their journey was far from over, but also knowing that whatever lay ahead, they would face it side by side. For the first time in their lives, they felt truly whole, their hearts united in a bond stronger than any force in the universe. And as the galaxy stretched endlessly before them, they embraced the promise of a brighter tomorrow, not just for themselves, but for all who dared to dream of peace.